conservative,
Christian, mother, wife,
Air Force veteran,
gun rights advocate.
This is Stacy on the Right. Here's your host, Stacy Washington.
Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. And for the kind messages, Facebook posts, thank you guys for checking us out and being with us here. We are welcoming into the show Brandon Arnold. He is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. It's NTU.org. Brandon, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, Stacy.
I'm glad you're here. Wow. So the tax bill is out. Tell us what we need to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good tax bill, and I know there's a lot of controversy. There's some Democrats that like it, Democrats that don't, Republicans that like it, Republicans that don't. But at its core, what it does is extend a lot of what was really important in the Trump tax cuts of 2017. It extends those for 2 years, some of the most pro-growth, pro-job creating provisions. And it also expands the child tax credit, which I think has been pro-family Republican tax policy going back to 1997 when Republicans put it into law. So there's a lot to like in this. It's not a perfect package by any stretch of the imagination, but that's what happens when you have a Democrat-controlled Senate, when you have a Democrat in the White House. You're going to have to make some concessions along the way.
So what do we need to know about the concessions? Because I think, obviously that's where we go first. What didn't we get that we want?
All right. We can focus on the bad first. I get it. There is definitely some stuff in there that is a little bit concerning. I think a lot of people have been focusing on this look-back period for tax credit eligibility, the child tax credit eligibility. So what Republicans have done with the child tax credit over the years is put in work requirements. If you want to get the refundable tax credit, that is a tax credit that is bigger than your tax liability, then you need to actually put in work. I think that makes a lot of sense. This isn't a program that's intended to provide government handouts. It's one to help offset the cost, the very high cost, I should say, of raising a child. And it requires people to actually go out and work in order to get it. So this 2-year look-back period, essentially what it means is that you can use either this year's work to qualify for the credit, or you can use the previous year's. That's your choice. So it is going to expand eligibility, and does create the ability of some people to work 1 year, not work the next, and still claim the credit. So I don't love that provision. Some people argue that there's some flexibility built into that because low-income people in particular sometimes bounce in and out of the workforce. I admit it is not the best provision of the bill by any stretch of the imagination. But again, that is one of the concessions that was necessary. I don't think it's a huge concession. It costs about $3 billion in total in order to get some really, really good stuff.
Okay, so my pet peeve, we'll go ahead and go there next, is this whole idea that we can only get these things passed for, 2 years here, 1 year there. This 2-year term just gets us into the end of the first year of some new president, right? Either Biden term 2, God forbid, or Trump term 1, or I guess it would be Trump term 2 as well. Yes. Okay. So term 2 for either one of these guys. That means you have another battle looming. So it gives you some tax law for now, but kicks the can down the road, and not really that far down the road. Like I'll go to bed tonight and it'll feel like tomorrow when I'm waking up and talking about, well, now they need to reauthorize or they're negotiating over the tax bill again.
Yeah, you're right there. I think it was intentional, though, because in this particular instance, what we have is a situation where much of the Trump tax cuts of 2017 are going to expire at the end of 2025. So what this bill does is align the expiration of the provisions here. We're talking about some really pro-growth, business-oriented tax relief. Makes a lot of sense. Plus this child tax credit expansion. This is all going to be lining up with the expiration of huge portions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, most notably the increased standard deduction that has allowed millions of people to stop itemizing their taxes and instead take the standard deduction, which is a lot easier and also provides a lower tax burden, as well as those lower individual rates that are so important. not just for individuals, of course, but so many small businesses pay taxes on the individual side, not on the corporate side. So those provisions, absolutely critical to preserving. Democrats want to pick and choose which ones they like, which they don't like. I'm very hopeful that we can renew all of those, as well as the stuff that we are passing, fingers crossed, on the House floor tomorrow.
So if it passes on the House floor tomorrow, then what's the next step? Are the votes there in the Senate to get this passed, and then will Biden actually sign it?
I'll answer the easy part first, and that is, yes, I do think Biden will sign it. I think he has expressed a desire to actually sign this bill, which is kind of a pleasant surprise for some of us. On the Senate side, I think there's a better chance than not that they will be able to get this across the finish line. There are some New Yorkers, in particular, some Californians as well, that have raised concerns about the SALT deduction. That is the state and local tax deduction. It allows people, wealthier people in blue high tax states, to write off the cost of their state and local taxes on their federal taxes. So it basically incentivizes the politicians in Albany, in Sacramento, in Annapolis, in these blue high tax states to keep raising taxes, because people know they are shielded from some of that higher tax burden by the fact that they can write it off on their federal taxes. It's one of the reasons why many of those states, the ones I just mentioned, are really out of control when it comes to taxing and spending. So Schumer, of course, being the Senate Majority Leader, being from one of the aforementioned states, that does create some problems. He has expressed some support for this, but he has also expressed reservations about this SALT deduction because he wants to reward his rich cronies in Manhattan with a big tax cut. And I'm hoping that does not happen.
Yeah, I remember the SALT tax fight, and I'm kind of halvesies. I mean, I understand the premise behind it, and I can see where, you would not want to reward high tax states, but you don't have to be in a high tax state for your taxes to be high. In Missouri, our taxes are generally lower than New Yorkers and Californians experience, but in certain taxing jurisdictions, depending on what school district you're in and what house you buy, you still can end up paying $20,000 or $30,000 a year. And so the SALT tax deduction actually works in the state of Missouri just as well as it does in New York. It doesn't seem like it would be the most likely place for you to see someone taking advantage of it, but it can work here too.
I suppose there can be benefits that flow from the state and local tax deduction. And I don't really want to raise people's taxes. That's not my prerogative by any stretch of the imagination. But I think clean, better tax policy is to get rid of this deduction and instead swap it for a better tax code. That means lower rates. That means more reasonable levels of taxation for people across the board. That would, to me, make a lot more sense than having this clunky mechanism that provides huge benefits to certain people. Again, most of the benefits are going to flow to people in higher tax states, wealthier people, and people that are in lower tax states that don't have as large incomes don't get any benefit here. So I just don't think it's a really fair mechanism. Again, I'm a big fan of lowering people's tax burden, but I would rather do it in a cleaner, neater fashion than this SALT deduction.
Yep, I totally sympathize with you. And I remember actually kind of reading up on it and thinking, it hits New Yorkers, it hits Californians, but in the rest of the country, everybody else is kind of like, yeah, why are you getting to deduct that on your federal taxes? That doesn't seem fair, especially in states where they actually keep their taxes intentionally low, like, Tennessee, Florida, places like that. So over at Punchbowl News, the title of the piece is "The Tax Bill is Out and House GOP Leadership is in a Tough Spot." Why are they in a tough spot with this bill?
Well, part of it is the SALT deduction. There's New York Republicans, again, some Californians, other high tax state Republicans that are in a revolt right now over this. There are some conservative members of the House that are concerned about the child tax credit expansion. One issue we didn't touch on is immigration. I think there are some concerns. I think they're overblown concerns about the benefits flowing to people who are in this country illegally and their children. This doesn't touch immigration. The bill itself does not touch immigration. It preserves the Social Security requirement that Trump and congressional Republicans put into place in 2017. So while we do need to pass immigration legislation, while we do need to strengthen our border and so forth, we can't do everything in every single piece of legislation. So I think that's a separate conversation that absolutely needs to be at or near the top of our list. But this is a tax bill, is not dealing with those provisions in this particular instance. So there's some people that are upset about that. And then I think there's just some people that don't like to do anything in Congress, and their fingers kind of stuck on the no button when it comes to vote every single time. Bills have to be perfect in order to get their support when, as we all know, the legislative process does not ever yield perfect bills. There's always going to be some imperfections there, and some people have problems with that.
Yeah. So I think that the other part about the tax bills is we have a fundamental disagreement between Democrats and Republicans about what taxes are supposed to be. Republicans seem to think that taxes should fund government functions and should be limited. Democrats tend to express a belief that taxes should be used to punish people for various reasons, and reward other people for various reasons. Like, we need to reward poor, indigent. We need to reward people who have kids who don't work. We need to reward people who are in the country illegally if we possibly can. Conversely, if you make a lot of money, if you've been successful, or your parents were and you inherited, or you started a company and really made it into something great and you're making money, we need to punish you because you're rich and therefore you are bad. So this inherent difference of thinking makes it almost impossible for Americans to trust that legislation that comes out that's supposed to be a compromise, that there could be anything that's good in it for one side or the other.
Yeah, I get it, and I think some degree of skepticism is always appropriate in these conversations, because you do have people trying to manipulate the tax code to make us do what they think we ought to do. You see that in the giant Inflation Reduction Act that Biden forced through Congress while he still had control of both the House and the Senate. That bill is Bidenomics in a nutshell. Bidenomics, as we all know, is not about helping people. It's about telling us what to do. And in this particular instance, they're telling us what kind of car to drive. We're supposed to drive EVs, not internal combustion engine vehicles. We're supposed to power our houses with renewable energy, not natural gas, electric energy, electric heat, and so forth. So it's really trying to dictate through the tax code what we can and cannot do. And I think that philosophy permeates much of the Democratic agenda here. In this instance, I don't think that this particular bill follows that same path all that much. I think raising a kid is extraordinarily expensive. I have two of them. I know you're a mom as well. It's really expensive, and I do think a child tax credit, again, has been a pro-family Republican idea for several decades now. I think it makes a lot of sense as part of our tax code. And then a lot of the other stuff in this bill is really, really critical in order to restore our manufacturing sector, in order to restore our ability to actually make stuff on U.S. soil, incentivize people to engage in research and development, to innovate, to make new things, all that stuff on American soil. So I think there's some really, really good incentives that are part of this legislation.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm with you on the ideal here that we want to reward family creation, and we want to support families. I do think that's really important for us to do. Families are the bedrock of our society, and everyone benefits from strong families, and good tax policy rewards family growth and attainment. So, I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly. So is there anything else that I didn't ask about that maybe we need to kind of, get a grip on here?
Well, I think one of the other things that's important here is Republicans in the past have prioritized tax relief over fiscal responsibility. And by that, I mean we've contributed to debt and deficits, not nearly as much as Democrats have done through their spending, their reckless spending. I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, the ARPA bill passed in 2021. They've spent trillions and trillions of dollars. But we need to do a better job of being fiscally responsible and balancing our budget. And this tax bill is actually paid for. It cuts the employee retention tax credit that was part of the pandemic response. It eliminates this program effectively. It's been abused. It's not necessary anymore. So I think it's great that we're actually doing tax legislation that is not going to further get us into red ink and exacerbate our debt problem. That's a really good facet of it. So.
Oh, I love hearing that. Okay. It's rare that I get a little bit of good news out of any piece of legislation that's being considered, so I'll take it. It's early in the year as well. It's January still, for at least a couple more days. I'll take it. Thank you. I appreciate the good thing that I can actually I take this story and share it around amongst my network and let people feel a little bit of goodness for the evening. Not bad.
Fantastic.
All right. So we really appreciate you always coming here to set the record straight on taxation and our government and what's important. This bill is something that people are talking about, and now they are fully up to date. Brandon Arnold, Executive VP at the National Taxpayers Union. The website is NTU.org. You can find so much great stuff there. Head over and check it out. Brandon, have a great evening.
Thanks, Stacy. You too.
All right. Have a wonderful night. We will be back with more Stacy on the right after this. 866-95-PATRIOT.